The bully mocked single dad at class reunion. Then the CEO walked up and said he's with me. What could happen when someone from the past underestimates a single dad in front of everyone? Why would a CEO step forward and say she is with him? Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful day filled with happiness and positive energy. Please give me 5 seconds to share a small part of your kindness by subscribing to this channel and turning on notifications for more inspiring stories. Thank you for being here and supporting this journey with us. Tell us where you're watching from around the world and what time it is for you right now. Now, let us begin the story. The person everyone laughs at today may be the person everyone respects tomorrow. Daniel Carter heard those words many years after one unforgettable night. But on this evening, he only felt the weight of old memories returning. You actually came here like this? Brian Mitchell said with a smile that carried years of arrogance. After all this time, you are still just the same old Daniel. The room became quiet for a moment, but Daniel did not respond with anger. He simply looked around at the faces from his past and remembered why he came. Not to impress anyone, not to prove anything. He came because his daughter told him he deserved one night to remember who he was before life became only responsibilities. Daniel Carter was a single father, a hardworking man, and someone who had learned that dignity did not depend on other people's approval. Years ago, he had been the quiet student nobody expected to succeed. Brian had always been the opposite. He was confident, popular, and determined to make sure everyone noticed him. At their high school reunion, those old roles seemed to return instantly. Brian arrived wearing an expensive suit, surrounded by former classmates who admired his stories about business success and his comfortable lifestyle. Daniel arrived wearing a simple jacket, driving an older car, and carrying a small gift his daughter had made for him before he left home. To many people in the room, the difference was obvious, but they only saw what was on the outside. They did not see the years Daniel spent waking up before sunrise to prepare breakfast for his daughter, Emily. They did not see the evenings he spent helping with homework after long hours at work. They did not see the sacrifices he made because he wanted his daughter to grow up knowing she was loved. Daniel had never considered himself unsuccessful. His life was not measured by expensive things or public recognition. His greatest achievement was being the father Emily needed. But Brian did not understand that. Still working that ordinary job? Brian asked, laughing softly. I thought you would have done something bigger by now. A few people around the room looked uncomfortable, but Daniel simply smiled. I'm happy with my life. That answer surprised them. In a world where people often competed to show who had more, Daniel seemed completely at peace with who he was. What nobody knew was that Daniel's story had chapters they had never seen. He had once stood on a completely different path, with opportunities most people would have dreamed about. But life had changed, and he had made choices that placed family above recognition. Meanwhile, across the city, Victoria Hayes, one of the most respected CEOs in the country, was preparing to attend the same reunion. She had no idea that the quiet man everyone was underestimating was someone whose kindness and character had once changed her own future. And before the night ended, everyone in that room would learn that appearances could hide the greatest stories. The past has a way of returning when people least expect it, but sometimes it returns for a reason. Daniel Carter stood in that reunion hall, surrounded by familiar faces, but he felt like a stranger among people who only remembered an old version of him. The classmates who once knew him had created their own stories about where his life had gone. They saw a simple jacket, an older vehicle, and a quiet man standing alone. They did not see the journey that brought him there. Daniel had learned long ago that life was not about proving people wrong. It was about becoming someone his daughter could be proud of. While others chased recognition, Daniel focused on building a stable home for Emily. Every morning, he prepared her breakfast before school. Every evening, he listened to her dreams and reminded her that kindness mattered. Those moments were invisible to the people who judged him, but they were the moments that defined him. At the reunion, Brian continued sharing stories about his own achievements. He talked about his business, his expensive vacations, and the people he knew. The room listened because Brian had always known how to capture attention. He enjoyed being admired, and he enjoyed reminding others of the difference between their lives and his own. When the conversation turned back toward Daniel, Brian smiled. "So what have you been doing all these years?" he asked. Daniel calmly answered, "Raising my daughter and building a good life." Some people smiled politely, but Brian looked unconvinced. To him, that answer sounded too simple. He believed success needed to be displayed, announced, and measured by achievements others could see. Daniel understood that Brian was not trying to learn about him. He was trying to compare himself. But Daniel refused to join that competition. He had already discovered something many people never learn. Peace is worth more than proving a point. As the evening continued, Daniel stepped outside for a few minutes to take a break from the noise. He looked at the city lights and thought about Emily. He remembered the day she was born and the promise he made to always be there for her. That promise had changed everything. Years earlier, Daniel had been offered opportunities that could have taken his life in a different direction. He had been talented, determined, and respected in his field. But when circumstances changed, he made a choice. He chose presence over prestige. He chose family over attention. And while some people viewed that choice as giving something up, Daniel knew he had gained something far more valuable: a meaningful life. Inside the reunion hall, something unexpected was about to happen. The doors opened, and conversations slowly began to fade. A woman entered who immediately changed the atmosphere of the room. She was confident, successful, and recognized by everyone who followed the business world. Victoria Hayes, the CEO known across the country for her leadership and achievements, had arrived. But what shocked everyone was not that she was there. It was who she walked toward. She did not stop to greet the most successful person in the room. She did not look for the people with the biggest titles. Her eyes went directly to Daniel Carter. And in that moment, the people who had underestimated him began to realize they never truly knew his story. The room became quieter as Victoria Hayes walked across the reunion hall. Many people recognized her immediately. She was the CEO of one of the most successful technology companies in the country, a woman whose decisions influenced thousands of employees and whose name appeared regularly in business news. Everyone expected her to greet the most impressive people in the room, the ones wearing expensive suits and talking about their achievements. But Victoria did something nobody expected. She walked directly toward Daniel Carter. Daniel looked surprised. He had not seen Victoria in years, and he certainly did not expect to see her at a high school reunion. "Daniel," Victoria said with a warm smile. "It has been a long time." The room watched in silence. Brian Mitchell, who had spent the evening making Daniel feel small, suddenly looked uncertain. The same man he had been mocking moments earlier was now being greeted with genuine respect by one of the most influential people in the room. Daniel simply smiled. "Victoria, I did not know you would be here." "I almost did not come," she replied. "But I knew I had to." Those words caught everyone's attention. They wondered how a CEO like Victoria knew a man they considered ordinary. But Daniel was not surprised by her kindness. He remembered who she was before the success, before the company, and before the world knew her name. Years earlier, Victoria had been a talented young professional trying to build her career. She had ambition, but she also faced moments of doubt. During one important period of her life, Daniel had been one of the few people who treated her with respect when others only saw her struggles. He never asked for anything. In return, he simply offered advice, encouragement, and support when she needed it most. At that time, Daniel was already known for his ability to understand people and solve difficult problems. But he never used his knowledge to make himself appear important. He preferred helping quietly. Victoria never forgot that. "You are the reason I kept going during one of the hardest moments of my career," she told him. The room grew even quieter. Suddenly, the people who had judged Daniel based only on his current life began hearing a completely different story. Brian looked uncomfortable. He had spent years believing Daniel had failed because he no longer had the status he expected. But he never considered that someone could walk away from success for a meaningful reason. Daniel did not need to explain himself. Victoria's words revealed what he never wanted to announce. He had value long before anyone recognized it. After their conversation, several classmates approached Daniel with curiosity. They asked about his connection with Victoria and wanted to know more about his past. Daniel answered politely, but never tried to impress them. He was still the same person who arrived quietly and planned to leave quietly. Victoria noticed that and smiled. "You have not changed," she said. Daniel laughed softly. "I hope that is a good thing." "It is," Victoria answered. "It is exactly why I respect you." For the first time that night, Daniel felt something he rarely experienced. Not admiration, not attention, something much simpler and more meaningful. Recognition. But the biggest surprise was still waiting. Because Victoria had not come to the reunion only to say hello. She had come because she knew Daniel's story was far greater than anyone in that room imagined. The truth about a person is rarely found in what others can see. It is hidden in the choices they make when nobody is watching, in the sacrifices they make without expecting recognition, and in the kindness they offer without asking for anything in return. That was the part of Daniel Carter's story that Victoria Hayes remembered most. As the reunion continued, more classmates gathered around them, trying to understand how a successful CEO could have such a strong connection with a man they had already judged. Daniel remained calm, answering questions with humility and avoiding any attempt to make himself look important. But Victoria knew the full story. She remembered a time before her company became successful, when she was just another person trying to find her direction. Years earlier, she had been facing a difficult decision that could have changed the future of her career. Many people around her focused only on numbers, profits, and appearances. Daniel was different. He saw the person behind the position. He listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and reminded her that success was not only about reaching the top. It was about staying true to who you were while getting there. "You were the first person who believed I could do something meaningful," Victoria told him. Daniel smiled gently. "I think you believed in yourself. You just needed someone to remind you." Those words revealed something important about Daniel. He did not see himself as someone who saved others. He simply believed people deserved encouragement when they were trying their best. That simple belief had shaped his entire life. While everyone in the room was beginning to understand Daniel differently, Brian Mitchell struggled with the reality in front of him. For years, Brian had measured people by their careers, their possessions, and the image they created. He believed he had succeeded because others admired him. But standing there, watching Victoria respect Daniel, he began questioning what success truly meant. Daniel had no desire to embarrass Brian or prove him wrong. In fact, Daniel barely mentioned the comments from earlier that evening. He continued speaking with the same patience and kindness he always showed. That made the contrast even clearer. The man who had the least interest and attention was the person everyone wanted to hear from. Victoria later asked Daniel why he never told anyone about his past accomplishments. Daniel looked toward the reunion crowd and quietly answered, "Because those things are part of my past. They are not who I am." Victoria understood. Immediately, Daniel was not defined by the opportunities he had lost or the titles he once held. He was defined by the person he chose to become afterward. As the night moved forward, more people approached Daniel. Some apologized for not seeing him clearly. Others simply wanted to reconnect and learn about his journey. Daniel accepted every conversation with grace. He did not hold on to the years of being misunderstood because he knew something many people spent a lifetime learning. Respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned through character. And as the reunion continued, everyone slowly realized that the quiet single father they had underestimated was not someone who had fallen behind. He was someone who had built a different kind of success, one that could not be measured by money, titles, or applause. Sometimes the most powerful moments are not the ones where someone receives a reward. They are the moments when the truth finally becomes impossible to ignore. As the reunion continued, the people around Daniel Carter began seeing him differently. The same man they had overlooked for years was now the person everyone wanted to understand. But Daniel did not act differently because of the attention. He remained the same quiet father who valued his daughter, his responsibilities, and the principles that guided his life. Victoria Hayes noticed that more than anyone. She watched how Daniel treated every person in the room with the same respect, whether they were successful or struggling. He never changed his attitude based on someone's position. That was something rare in her world. Victoria had spent years surrounded by talented people, but many were focused on gaining recognition. Daniel was focused on making a difference. As they continued talking, Victoria shared a story that surprised everyone nearby. She explained that years earlier, when she was preparing to launch her first major project, many people doubted her. They saw her age and lack of experience as weaknesses. But Daniel saw something different. He saw determination. He saw potential. He encouraged her to trust her own abilities when she was unsure of herself. "You did not see me as someone who needed to prove myself," Victoria said. "You saw me as someone who already had value." Daniel listened quietly. He did not remember the moment as something extraordinary. To him, it was simply what people should do for each other. He believed everyone needed support at certain points in life. That belief was part of who he was. Brian watched the conversation from a distance. For the first time that night, he seemed less interested in comparing himself to others. He began noticing the details he had ignored for years. Daniel was not trying to impress anyone. He was not using Victoria's respect to make himself look important. He was simply being Daniel, and that was what made him different. Later, several classmates asked Daniel about his career and past experiences. They were surprised to learn that he had once worked on important projects and had been recognized for his problem-solving abilities. They wondered why he had never shared those achievements. Daniel smiled and gave a simple answer. Because life is not only about what you accomplish. It is also about what you choose to protect. Everyone became quiet after hearing those words. They understood that Daniel's decision to focus on his family was not a sign of failure. It was a sign of strength. He had chosen a different path, one that many people might not understand until they experienced it themselves. Victoria looked at Daniel with admiration. She knew that his greatest achievement was not something written in a business report or displayed in a trophy case. It was the person he had become, a man who could have carried bitterness from the past but chose kindness instead. A father who continued moving forward without needing applause. A person who proved that true success was not always visible at first glance. As the evening came closer to its end, the reunion no longer felt like a gathering where people compared achievements. It became a place where people rediscovered the value of character. And Daniel Carter, the man everyone thought they understood, became the person they finally wanted to know. Sometimes the truth does not arrive with a loud announcement. Sometimes it appears quietly, through the respect people show and the choices they make when nobody is forcing them to act. That was exactly what happened as the reunion continued. Daniel Carter had entered the room expecting to remember old times and leave with a simple memory. He never expected the evening to become a moment where people finally understood him. But the biggest change was not in how others viewed Daniel. It was in how they began viewing themselves. Many classmates started reflecting on the way they had judged people based on appearances. They remembered how quickly they had assumed Daniel had fallen behind because his life looked different from theirs. They saw his simple clothes, his quiet personality, and his focus on family as signs that he had not achieved enough. But now they understood they had been measuring success with the wrong standard. Victoria Hayes continued talking with Daniel, and their conversation moved away from the past and toward the future. She asked him about his goals and what he wanted for himself and Emily. Daniel smiled before answering. "I want my daughter to grow up knowing that character matters. I want her to understand that being kind is never a weakness." Victoria appreciated that answer because it represented everything she admired about him. In her business world, people often focused on competition and results. Daniel reminded her that the way people reached their goals mattered just as much as the goals themselves. Meanwhile, Brian Mitchell stood nearby, quietly observing. For years, Brian had believed that being admired was the same as being respected. He had spent so much time trying to appear successful that he never stopped to consider what true success looked like. Watching Daniel interact with others forced him to confront something uncomfortable. The man he had mocked was not seeking approval from anyone. He already had something Brian had been trying to find for years: peace. As the night continued, Brian eventually approached Daniel. The confidence he carried earlier was gone. "I owe you an apology," Brian said. Daniel looked at him calmly. He did not expect those words, and he did not need them to feel better about himself. We're young, Daniel replied. People make mistakes. What matters is what they do after they realize them. Brian nodded. That simple response affected him more than any argument could have. Daniel was not trying to make him feel guilty. He was giving him the same grace he had shown everyone else. Victoria watched from distance and understood why Daniel had always stood out. His strength was not found in his past achievements or the people who respected him. It was found in the way he treated those who had once misunderstood him. Later that evening, Daniel received a message from Emily asking if he was having a good time. He smiled and replied that he was. But he also told her something important. He said he had learned that people sometimes need time to see the truth about someone. Emily responded with a simple message that made him smile. I already knew you were special, Dad. Daniel looked at those words for a moment and felt grateful. Because in the end, the greatest recognition was not coming from the people at the reunion. It had always come from the people who truly knew his heart. And as the night came to a close, everyone there carried a new understanding. A person's value is not created by attention. It is revealed through a lifetime of choices. The most meaningful changes in life often happen quietly, without recognition or celebration. They happen when someone chooses understanding instead of judgment, forgiveness instead of resentment, and kindness instead of pride. For Daniel Carter, the reunion was never about proving that others were wrong. It was about remembering the person he had always been. As the night continued, the atmosphere inside the room slowly changed. The conversations were no longer focused on careers, possessions, or who had achieved the most. Instead, people began sharing memories, asking questions, and seeing each other beyond the images they had created over the years. Daniel noticed the difference, but he did not take pride in it. He simply appreciated the opportunity to reconnect. Victoria Hay stayed near him throughout the evening, not because she wanted people to notice their connection, but because she genuinely valued the person Daniel was. She admired that he never used his past experiences to make others feel less important. He carried knowledge, but he carried it with humility. He carried success, but he carried it without needing attention. Before leaving the reunion, Victoria asked Daniel if he had ever considered returning to the business world. She explained that someone with his ability to understand people and solve problems could make a significant impact. Daniel thought carefully before answering. Maybe one day, he said, but I want to make sure whatever I do still allows me to be there for Emily. Victoria smiled because that answer did not surprise her. It was the same reason she respected him years earlier. Daniel always understood what mattered most. He was not someone who chased opportunities simply because they looked impressive. He chose opportunities that aligned with his values. That was a lesson many successful people never learned. Outside the venue, Daniel prepared to leave. The night air was calm, and he looked at the building where so many memories had been created. Years ago, he would have worried about what people thought of him. He would have wondered if they saw him as someone who failed. But now he felt something different. He knew his worth did not depend on their opinions. His life had meaning because of the love he gave and the people he cared for. Before Daniel walked away, several classmates stopped him to say goodbye. Some thanked him for sharing his story. Others admitted they had judged him too quickly. Daniel accepted every conversation with the same patience he had shown all night. He did not remind them of their mistakes. He simply encouraged them to look at people differently in the future. Brian watched this from a distance. He realized that Daniel had something he had spent years trying to achieve. Genuine respect. Not the kind created by appearances or achievements, but the kind earned through character. Later, Victoria walked outside and joined Daniel before he left. She thanked him again for the influence he had on her life. Daniel smiled and told her that she had built her own success. Victoria shook her head gently. You helped me believe I could. Those words stayed with Daniel. He had spent years believing his greatest contribution was being a good father. But that night reminded him that even quiet acts of kindness could create a lasting impact. As he drove home, he thought about Emily waiting for him. He smiled because he knew something important. A person does not need everyone to recognize their value. They only need to continue living with dignity until the right people finally see it. Sometimes life gives people a moment they never expected, not because they finally become someone different, but because others finally learn to see who they have always been. Daniel Carter drove home from a reunion with a peaceful feeling he had not experienced in years. The night had reminded him that his journey was valuable, even if it looked different from what others expected. When he arrived home, Emily was still awake, waiting to hear about his evening. "Did you have a good time?" she asked with curiosity. Daniel smiled and sat beside her. "I did. I remembered something important tonight." Emily looked at him and waited. Sometimes people do not understand someone's story until they take the time to listen. Emily smiled because she already understood her father better than anyone. To her, Daniel had never been someone who needed to prove his worth. He was simply her dad, the person who showed up every day and made her feel loved. In the weeks after the reunion, unexpected changes began happening. Victoria Hayes reached out to Daniel with an opportunity to work together on a new project. She explained that she wanted someone involved who understood people, not just numbers. Daniel was hesitant at first. He had spent years building a simple life, and he did not want to lose the balance he created with Emily. Victoria understood his concerns. She did not want to change who Daniel was. She wanted to create a place where his values could make a difference. "The reason I want you involved is because you never forgot the human side of success," Victoria told him. Daniel accepted after careful thought, not because he wanted recognition, but because he believed he could help create something meaningful. His new role surprised many people who had known him from the past. Some expected him to become different after receiving a new opportunity. But Daniel remained exactly the same. He arrived early. He listened carefully. He treated every person with respect, regardless of their position. Employees quickly noticed that he was different from many leaders they had met. He did not talk about himself. He asked questions. He did not demand attention. He earned trust. Victoria watched as Daniel influenced the company culture in ways she had hoped for. People became more open. Teams worked better together. Employees felt valued because someone finally took the time to understand them. Meanwhile, Brian continued reflecting on everything that happened at the reunion. For years, he had believed he was successful because people admired him. But Daniel showed him another kind of success, the kind built through patience, loyalty, and integrity. Brian eventually reached out again, not because he wanted anything from Daniel, but because he wanted to express genuine respect. "I spent years thinking success meant being above others," Brian admitted. "I was wrong." Daniel accepted his words and replied calmly, "We all learn at different times." That response showed the difference between them. Brian needed others to recognize him. Daniel had learned to recognize the value within himself. As months passed, more people discovered the qualities that Victoria had always seen in him. Daniel became known not because of a title or a position, but because of the way he made people feel. He reminded everyone around him that leadership was not about standing higher than others. It was about helping others rise. And for Daniel Carter, that was always the kind of success that mattered most. The most important moments in life are not always the ones that change our circumstances. Sometimes they're the moments that change the way we see ourselves. For Daniel Carter, the journey was never about becoming someone worthy of respect. He had always been worthy. The difference was that, after years of being overlooked, people finally began to understand the person he had always been. Months after the reunion, Daniel continued building his new chapter with the same quiet strength that guided him through every challenge. He worked alongside Victoria Hayes, but he never forgot where he came from. He still prepared breakfast for Emily every morning. He still listened to her stories after school. He still believed that being present for the people he loved was the greatest responsibility he had. Victoria often admired that about him. She had met many talented people throughout her career, but few had the ability to remain humble after receiving recognition. Daniel never allowed success to change his character because his character had always been his greatest success. One afternoon, Victoria asked Daniel why he thought people often judged others too quickly. Daniel looked out the office window and thought carefully before answering. Sometimes people only see the chapter they walk into. They do not see the pages that came before. Victoria remembered those words because they explained Daniel perfectly. Many people at the reunion had only seen one chapter of his life. They saw a single father with a simple lifestyle and assumed they understood his entire story. But they never saw the sacrifices, the decisions, and the love that shaped him. Over time, even Brian Mitchell began living differently. He started focusing less on proving himself and more on becoming a better person. He never forgot the lesson Daniel taught him that night. Real respect could not be demanded through appearances. It had to be earned through actions. Years later, when people asked Victoria about the best decision she made as a leader, she often mentioned Daniel. She explained that the most valuable people are not always the ones who speak the loudest or seek the most attention. Sometimes there are the people who quietly make a difference wherever they go. Daniel's story became a reminder to everyone around him that success could not be measured only by money, titles, or public recognition. A person's true worth was found in the kindness they showed, the promises they kept, and the lives they touched. One evening, Daniel and Emily sat together watching the sunset from their backyard. Emily asked her father if he ever wished his life had turned out differently. Daniel smiled and held her hand. "Every choice brought me here," he said, "and I would not trade this life for anything." That answer carried everything Daniel believed. He did not need the world to forget the years when people underestimated him. He did not need everyone to apologize for the way they once saw him. He only needed to continue living with honesty and dignity. Because in the end, the greatest victory was not making others regret judging him. The greatest victory was becoming the kind of person who never needed their approval. And Daniel Carter proved that true success is not found in what the world gives you. It is found in the person you choose to become when the world is not watching.